Welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because, man, we are unpacking what has to be one of the most profoundly comforting, yet, let's be honest, culturally bizarre metaphors passed down to us from ancient history. We're going to look closely at a concept that just completely flips the script on everything our modern world tells us about value, strength, and success. It's a journey into ancient pottery, radical theology, and some really deep personal application. You ready? Let's get into it. But we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us. Now those words, penned by the Apostle Paul in his second letter to the Corinthians, carry such an incredible weight. Okay, let's dive into this, because to our modern ears, this 2,000-year-old imagery actually sounds kind of strange, right? I mean, we have banks, we have high-tech safes, we use digital encryption. We definitely don't keep our absolute most prized possessions in fragile dirt pots. So what is Paul actually trying to tell us here? To get to the heart of this, we kind of have to ask a blunt question. Why on earth would you store treasure in trash? Think about how totally absurd this would be today. It would literally be like taking priceless diamond jewelry or, I don't know, a multi-million-dollar royal crown and hiding it inside a crumpled disposable paper coffee cup. You just wouldn't do it. The container completely contradicts the value of what's inside. And that tension right there, that core mystery, is exactly what we're going to unravel today. To get the full picture, we need to look at the original Greek phrase Paul uses here, ostrakinoi skouiesin, which literally translates to clay containers, earthen jars, or pottery vessels. And here's the kicker. Out of all the words he could have used to describe a container, Paul deliberately chose the absolute lowest, most basic, bottom-of-the-barrel category available in the ancient world. You see, unlike vessels made of gold or silver, which were precious, right, reserved for the wealthy, ancient clay pots were incredibly cheap. They were super common, literally found in every single household. They were notoriously fragile, easily broken, and most importantly, they were entirely replaceable. Look, if a rich merchant dropped a clay jar, it wasn't some huge tragedy. He'd just grab another one. They were the cheap, everyday, disposable containers of their era. Now, what's really interesting here is the historical cleverness of the folks who lived back then. To us, shoving treasure into a cheap clay pot sounds foolish, right? But to ancient people, it was actually a highly practical security measure. They frequently concealed valuables. We're talking coins, family jewelry, important documents, inside these super ordinary containers precisely because thieves were far less likely to notice them. I mean, a thief looking for gold isn't going to waste time smashing open the ancient equivalent of Tupperware. And honestly, we actually have massive archaeological evidence to back this up. Just think about one of the absolute greatest historical discoveries of the 20th century, the Dead Sea Scrolls. These priceless ancient manuscripts were successfully preserved for nearly 2 millennia. And how? Because they were safely rolled up and hidden inside perfectly ordinary, dusty clay jars tucked away in a cave. This brilliantly grounds Paul's metaphor in real historical reality. The disguise worked flawlessly. So history aside, Paul is using this reality to point out a massive theological contrast. As human beings, we naturally celebrate the outward stuff, right? Flawless appearance, charisma, physical strength, wealth, worldly influence. We just love an impressive container. But God engineers this great reversal. He focuses entirely on the inner contents, on the heart. And astonishingly, he chooses to use our human weakness as his preferred vessel. So what exactly is the treasure that God places inside these fragile little clay jars of ours? Well, if we look just one verse prior, in 2 Corinthians 4:6, Paul clarifies this perfectly. The treasure isn't literal money. It isn't your personal talent or your career success. No, the treasure is the light of God's glory. It's the life-changing truth of the gospel, the transforming work of salvation, and the very presence of Christ dwelling within believers. It is quite literally a heavenly reality placed inside a dusty vessel. So the absolutely crucial point here is found right in the second half of that verse, that the excellence of the power may be of God and not of us. Think about it. If God put his ultimate treasure into a golden, flawless, magnificent container, people would naturally praise the container. They'd think the human being was the source of all that greatness. By intentionally hiding his glory inside fragile, ordinary weakness, the source of the power becomes undeniably, unequivocally clear. It is all God. Picture this in your mind for a second. Imagine walking into a pitch-black room, and suddenly a brilliantly bright, warm flame bursts to life inside a small, chipped and cracked clay lamp. The light just spills out through those cracks, illuminating the entire room, bringing warmth and vision. In that moment, absolutely no one is looking at the lamp and praising the dirty clay. No way. They are entirely captivated by the beauty and power of the flame. And this isn't just an isolated metaphor either. It's a consistent pattern seen throughout Scripture, often called a last day principle. Just look at these biblical events. Gideon's massive army of 32,000, God whittled it down to just 300 men. The Israelites boxed in completely at the Red Sea. Elijah, standing entirely alone against hundreds of rival prophets. The disciples, scattered and terrified. God consistently reduces human confidence to its absolute lowest point before acting. Why? So that when the victory comes, the glory is entirely his. Now, Paul wasn't just preaching this from some ivory tower. He was actively living it. Just verses later, he actually describes his own life, his own clay vessel, if you will. He says he is troubled on every side. He's perplexed. He's actively persecuted. He's cast down. Paul's life was incredibly difficult. His vessel looked deeply broken, chipped and scarred by the world. And yet, remarkably, despite the profound fragility of his life, the unshakable treasure of the gospel advanced anyway. Later on in 2 Corinthians, Paul receives this profound message directly from God. My strength is made perfect in weakness. And this brilliantly illustrates the entire concept. The chips, the scars, and the cracks in our lives, they aren't flaws that somehow ruin God's plan. Actually, they are the very spaces, the exact openings where God's grace and strength shine through the absolute brightest. Our weakness literally becomes the stage upon which His power is displayed. There's also this really remarkable tension in the grammar Paul uses here. He says, we have this treasure in clay. Notice that it's in the present tense. He doesn't say we will have it once we're finally perfected or we had it in the past. We have it right now. And what this means is that possessing this extraordinary treasure does not magically eliminate our human frailty. Believers right now still experience fatigue, sickness, aging, and daily struggles. The divine treasure dwells intimately right within our present messy reality. Let's build on this understanding of true value for a second and consider a couple of comparisons. An ordinary, maybe even crumpled paper envelope means absolutely nothing, unless, of course, it holds $1 million check inside. A dusty, fragile clay jar is completely worthless unless it contains a priceless royal crown. The point here is profound. The value of any container comes entirely, 100%, from what it holds. The vessel merely carries the worth. Which brings us to a really important personal application today. How many people do you know, maybe even yourself at times, I know I've been there, who spend their entire lives furiously polishing the clay container? We obsess over our appearances, our resumes, our outward perceived strengths, all while completely neglecting the eternal treasure inside. I want to warmly remind you right now, feeling ordinary, feeling chipped, or feeling weak never, ever disqualifies you from being used. In fact, it kind of makes you the perfect candidate. The greatest danger in life isn't being a fragile clay jar. The truth is, we are all fragile clay jars, susceptible to breaking. The far greater, much more important question we need to ask ourselves is simply this: what is inside the jar? Stop worrying so much about the temporary clay and start focusing your life on the eternal treasure within. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey of discovery today in this explainer. I'll see you next time.